Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at UNC Pembroke. Today we have a very interesting topic, so if you don't like four-letter words, I suggest you change the channel. We're talking to Nick Marino, the author of Holy a comic that's really quite interesting. Nick, welcome to Comic Culture.
Thanks for having me here, Terrence. I'm really glad to be here with you.
Now let's talk a little bit about Holy It's a book that is looking at Jesus and Satan and a lot of the older gods from mythology as if they were cast members of an action film from the 1980s.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great way to establish the premise. And yeah, that's what I was going for as well, so that works for me.
So the topic is controversial. I mean, we are here in the South, which is the American Bible Belt. A lot of people would probably be a little upset to read a book like Holy where Jesus is sort of a hard-fighting, two-fisted drinker, parties a lot, and at the same time he's also, still Jesus. So what are your thoughts when you hear criticisms like that?
First off, I gotta say, you'd be surprised. I haven't heard that many criticisms like that. I don't see it in that way, but then again, I'm one of the sources of it, so I'm probably not going to connect with the material in that sense. But my view on it is that, yes, this is a satire of the way that culture perceives these characters, but not necessarily one that is, how could I say, blasphemous, in the sense that I'm not telling people that they shouldn't believe what they want to believe in terms of religion. I'm more satirizing the way that these characters have sort of gotten these hive mind roles within the culture that we exist in now.
Have you ever been concerned, especially with the events that happened in Paris recently, that somebody won't like what you've written and take it upon themselves to do the polar opposite of what is written in every holy book and seek violent vengeance upon you?
Hey, you know what? It's possible. The stuff that happened with Charlie Hebdo happened right around the time our first issue was coming out, so this book certainly wasn't created with something that extreme in mind. But with that said, obviously there's been a lot of attacks on cartoonists in Europe for some of the stuff that they've done. It's possible somebody could, but at the same time, that's not really what I'm thinking about when I'm just trying to tell a story that I think would be really fun, something I'd want to pick up at the comic book store.
Okay, you mentioned before, I just wanted to get that out of the way, by the way, so that way our audience would feel that we covered the tough topic. But let's talk about satire, and this book is satire. What makes successful satire to you?
I'm searching for that answer every day. It's one of my favorite. I don't know, satire is a weird term. Is it a genre? Is it a storytelling device? I mean, it's a little bit of everything in that regard. It's one of my favorite things to work with in terms of telling a story because it's at once funny and it's sort of, you can take the seriousness from it as you wish. I feel like it's kind of it's a door in that sense. You can choose how far you want to open that door in terms of the cultural commentary that you see in satire. For me, what I think makes it most effective is when it works on the multiple levels of, yeah, this is something that's maybe a little bit shocking, a little bit funny, a little bit stirring, but this is something that's taking you to a place where you're starting to ask questions. To me, that's when it really becomes effective.
It's funny because we are familiar with satire as a culture. I think some of the most successful programs on television are satire, whether it's The Daily Show, Family Guy, or The Simpsons. And these are shows that people have been watching for years and years, and yet we seem to get offended more with comedy than we do with actions of people as they live out their normal everyday lives. Do you have any thoughts on why comedy is treated as some sort of taboo? You can't say certain things in certain contexts, but you can do the polar opposite of what you're supposed to do spiritually in real life and just get a slap on the wrist.
That's a great question, and that's another one that I'm always searching for a great answer to. These are things I think about all the time, and these are some of the questions I was asking myself when I was working on this particular story. I don't know that I have a really good response to it. Obviously, there's hypocrisy everywhere, and that's sort of maybe a human condition potentially. I'm not well studied enough to make that grand of a claim, but I think that maybe comedy is vulnerable in the sense that it doesn't seem to be taking itself seriously. And sometimes people confuse the notion that a comedian or a storyteller working in comedy is very committed to their craft with the idea that they are making a joke, because jokes inherently have this air of it's not necessarily to be taken serious. I don't know. Are you following me on that?
I think I am. I mean, it's interesting when we read about a comedian on Twitter, like let's say Gilbert Gottfried. He made a tweet after the tsunami in Japan, which, you know, on the surface is insensitive, but at the same time, it's just a joke that a comedian, a professional who's looking at life from a skewed perspective, he's just coming up with an idea and he's putting it down, in this case, in 140 characters or less. And the difference between something that we would do 20 years ago where you'd write it down in a diary or on a notebook and put it down and say, I'll have to remember this in a few weeks, you know, it's out instantly. And as a result, Gilbert Gottfried's career has really taken a nosedive. And yet we admire comedians when they can tell us things about ourselves that are true, but it seems we do have this weird sensibility about if it's too soon or if somebody gets offended, you know, because we use the wrong phrasing or terminology, perhaps not realizing that there was some satirical bent to it. It's really not a question, just more of a long-winded statement.
No, I think it's a great observation. I mean, there's an interesting progression that people often have in their entertainment careers that I've been following, which is you sort of break onto the scene in a way that's maybe a little bit edgier than people are ready for, and then you establish yourself and your edginess becomes a status quo, and then once you've established that, everybody is constantly critiquing you to see how are you going to uphold that status quo? How are you going to continue to give them what they expect from you? And I think that maybe part of Gilbert's problem, I don't know if I'm taking this too off track, but you know, he is so established and people know what to expect from him within a certain safe context as he's been presented for years. He's that funny voice, you know, that's what they think. And then when he does something, which is along in keeping with what he initially did to get there in the first place, it's like, oh my God. But no, this guy's been offending people for a long time. I mean, this is like his stock and trade. He offends you and he's got a funny voice. But because he's so established, people are just remembering, you know, the funny voice. And I think that, I don't know, he's almost a victim of his own success in that sense. Because if nobody really cared, if they just thought this is an offensive comedian, nobody would have even thought twice about it, I don't think.
Well, speaking of being a victim of one's own success, your book, Holy was published by Action Lab under a mature imprint. Have you gotten any feedback about the book from the readers, and you know, has it been positive, negative, somewhere in the middle?
Well, I'm certainly not a victim of my own success, although I look forward to the opportunity to find out what that might be like. Action Lab is on their way up in terms of the profile that they're getting every day for the hard work that they put into the stories that, you know, their creators tell. But right now, I think where the company's at and where I'm personally at as somebody who, this is my first book that's published not by me, I'm at a stage where I'm mostly only hearing from fans. I'm not really hearing from too many haters yet. We had one review from a website called Florida Geek Scene, which has been my favorite review so far, which gave us 1 out of 10, and it said, this book is and that was the whole review. No, I mean, they said a little bit more, but that was the way they summarized it. And I thought that was wonderful. I was like, that's the perfect response to this book, because either you're looking for something within it or you just have a knee-jerk reaction. You know, like, let's start a conversation. And to me, this is, although I may have not started a conversation with that reviewer, to me, it starts the conversation in people's minds when they see that out there. So the response, it's been positive, but I don't know that I'll get much of a negative response from something like this until there are a lot more eyes on it.
It's interesting because when I was reading the book, there were a few moments when I found myself laughing in my office reading it, and it was at the completely and totally most inappropriate things, because there are a lot of different things in there that are the way the character of Jesus stops a nuclear missile is a rather unique take on how one would stop a nuclear missile. So I could see that getting a Spinal Tap-esque review from a reviewer it's not necessarily a bad thing. But again, you know, comedy is highly subjective. It either makes you laugh or it doesn't make you laugh. And if you aren't able to get the joke, it's going to be something that you're just not comfortable with. Yeah. Now, you had mentioned before that this is your first published work for something that you haven't self-published. What have you worked on prior to Holy?
Well, for about the past, it's 2015, Okay, so 5.5 years or so, I've been making web comics and self-publishing, sort of teaching myself how to make comics, a comic book grad school, if you will. You know, there are programs out there now, but those haven't been around for too long, and a lot of them weren't even options when I was deciding to train myself in making comics. So I taught myself mostly doing other satire. I did a web comic called Zombie Palin about it's so ridiculous to look back on it now. Basically, what if Palin and McCain had won the presidential election in 2008, and then she became a zombie? It's a little convoluted when I go back and say it.
So we would call
But
a high concept.
yeah, right. I did a time travel music comedy called Time Log with a bunch of friends of mine, and I learned a lot from that. And then I think the thing I spent my largest amount of time on was a satire called Super Haters, which sort of skewered I guess you could say, the unchanging, ignorant nature of superhero comics. I'm not saying they're all like that. I'm just saying there's a side of them that I think that's in there, and I enjoyed doing that.
It seems like I mean, working both topically and within, a long-standing genre, that it seems that there's a lot of different things that you have been playing with. And as far as self-publishing, you said these were all web comics?
Well, yeah, I think most of what I've done starts as a webcomic, but that's kind of the way that the publishing works now. You put it out on the web because that's the easiest way to get a lot of eyes, and then you take those stories that you did for the web, collect them into a printed edition, and take it to a convention.
Okay, and then from the convention, you're able to have some printed copies that you're able to sell and then maybe get somebody else's eyes?
Yeah, I'm not totally. I'm more of a writer than an artist. And as an artist, you have more options within this business coming up. Mainly commissions when you're sitting at a convention table. People want to see your art. Nobody's coming up to me and saying, "Hey, would you write me a poem? Would you write me a short story?" You know what I mean? So I don't know how much of an effect it has when I sit at my table with my photocopied and, super ultra small press comics, and they got these weird titles, and they're kind of raw because when you're first learning how to do something, it's kind of raw. I don't know how many eyes you get from being at the convention, but I get experience. So now, if I go to a convention with Action Lab, which I've only had the opportunity to do once, but I was very thankful to be at New York Comic Con, debuting our book there. It was really cool. I've been there before. I've done that at conventions that size. I know what to expect, so I can work the floor a little bit more, I guess you could say. But I'm not saying I'm necessarily good at it. I've just been there.
So I'm shocked to hear that no one is asking a writer to, quick, write me a one-page paragraph. Go.
Yeah.
I'd love it if you wrote me a treatise on Captain America. That'd be fantastic. But Neil Adams is still selling his prints for $20 a pop. So go figure.
Yeah.
So the convention scene is really sort of a networking opportunity, as well as a way to reach your audience. And another way that people reach their audiences is through crowdfunding, projects that they put up on Kickstarter. Is that something that you've worked with at all?
I've only done crowdfunding as a collaborator. I haven't launched a campaign myself. Not that I wouldn't want to. I just hadn't had a property I really felt like was right for it yet. That's holy fuck. If we did not find a publisher, would have attempted to be crowdfunded. Although I don't really know, based upon the rules. I guess it would have been okay. I'm not sure. Sometimes things get shut down. Sometimes they don't.
Well, it's interesting because crowdfunding seems to be the way that we're able to get past the few companies that are in charge of the comic industry or any entertainment industry, whether it's the 6 or 7 major companies that control television and film production, whether it's the 3 or 4 major publishers that produce comics. But it's a way for artists to reach an audience without having to get the approval of some other gatekeepers. And we're starting to see a lot more comics getting picked up after they've done the Kickstarter route. So what are your thoughts on crowdfunding? I mean, just in general.
I think it's wonderful. I mean, the digital aspect of creating comics is really what caused me to return to comics after stepping away from them when I was in my teens, my early 20s. And it helped me see them from a different angle. And so extrapolating upon that, what digital was able to do just for the creation of art, I feel like crowdfunding has been able to do for the dissemination of that art to other people, to fans. I think it's absolutely wonderful. Like, I wish I had a project that I was really gung-ho about crowdfunding. I guess maybe because I revere it, I don't kind of do it haphazardly. I really want to have the right thing that I feel like I can really dedicate a whole month to, just talking about it nonstop on the internet, promoting it for Kickstarter. But I love it. I think it's wonderful. I'm burned out on the stuff that we see come from companies through the established, circuit. Says the person who's interested in getting deeper into that. But at the same time, I guess I love the fact that it's another opportunity, and it's one that's more accessible, and really you prove yourself through the quality of the content and then through your reliability as the source of that content. It's cool.
So you said you have an interest in working for some of the major publishers. Are you looking to do something like a traditional superhero book, or would it be sort of the, I guess, don't know how to call counterculture commercial, but the commercial counterculture style book of, let's say, a Love and Rockets or Milk and Cheese or something along those lines?
I'm interested in opportunities. I don't know which opportunity I'll want till it crosses my path. But working on webcomics, self-publishing, that provides its own set of opportunities. But going through a publisher, working within the business, that provides a whole new field of options out there. And I'm just interested in finding out what those might be as I continue to tell stories that I care about.
Well, it's interesting. You talk about stories that you care about. And as a writer, basically what we try and do as writers is come up with a character that the reader or the audience will care about, and that we will be able to put into an extraordinary situation that helps them grow and develop. And one of the interesting things, I think the character in Holy that we as an audience relate most to is Sister Maria. And she is a sort of a journey that goes on. She's beyond the Lois Lane type of character. She sort of starts out very timid and becomes more assertive toward the end of the book. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on the character and how that helps you set up, and how the events will, I guess, paint their progression.
I love Maria. I think she's fantastic. To me, she's the main character of this story. And that's because she's the one who really has a character arc. The other characters, I sort of, really she's the only human. Everybody else is a god. And the way I decided to approach the gods within this story are that not only do they have other priorities, but they're simply at another level of dealing with problems. Whereas Maria is somebody who is taking on these issues in a more tactile way to what we would be able to relate to, basically like you're saying. And, my goal with Sister Maria was to subvert the idea of the female lead within the traditional action movie narrative. I love action movies, but they're always letting me down with the female leads. It's like, come on, how dumb do you think we are? Like, you're really insulting me. Like, let this woman do something. Like, don't have her there to be sexy. Have her there to be, I don't know, anything, compelling, basically. And for me, what I was trying to do with Maria is take her on a progression where you see her tied up at the beginning and you think, great, this is going to be some bullshit, And by the time you get to the end, you're like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, this is the character who not only instigated all of the action of the plot, at least the plot as we experience it, but she is the one who, she's the decision maker. She's not only the instigator, but the decision maker. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a better phrase for it.
It's interesting, you talk about female action heroes, and this is something that we see a lot, whether it's in comics or whether it's in film or even on television. A lot of times the heroes, the heroines rather, are there as just a device to get a man to do something, and it's very rare that we see a female character that is leading a story in a way that feels as equal as a male character. There was the movie Salt, I guess, with Angelina Jolie. That would be sort of an analog to a James Bond. And she wasn't the type who was waiting on someone to rescue her. But we do see that a lot in a lot of other films where the female character, even though she's got a sword or she's packing 2 guns, she's really not much more than a way to get a guy to do something. So it's interesting that you're looking at that problem and trying to bring that into your work so that it gives it, I guess, a more balanced approach.
I mean, I would hope that it feels more balanced to people who read it. I don't know. It's a book called How balanced is it really? I don't know. But to me, I feel like that's, something I'm striving for just as a storyteller. I love Pam Grier's films. And I'm not saying that Sister Maria is necessarily on that level. I think Pam is just an amazing actress and storyteller with the way that, she guides the progression of the character. But I wanted to imbue some of that. Maybe you're underestimating this character a little bit, and then you're blown away by really how kick-ass she can be.
Yeah, it's true, because like you were saying at the beginning, it did seem like she was going to be the damsel in distress, and that's going to, get the character of Jesus to do something. And really, she's the one, as you say, she drives the whole action. One of the things that I found really interesting was what I assume is your skewering of mainstream media when you have the character of Zeus and Isis, or characters of Zeus and Isis, appearing on the Helen DeGeneres show. And they're talking about Armageddon, and it's, treated as just another couple of guests on my show, and I'm going to do my goofy dance at the end. I just was wondering what your thoughts were on the media and your approach in this satire.
This is stuff it's what drives me every day, is the sort of hypocrisy and just insanity that I see in mass media. Well, in myself too, but that's another thing I'm working on. That's separate from this. First off, I actually like Ellen in terms of she's a very positive figure, and I really appreciate her positivity. But that doesn't make her immune to the same sort of bull that is just constantly plaguing the endless advertising cycle that we get caught up in with our entertainment and media. And to me, our sort of satire of that program, and there's even, it's linked to a crowdfunding satire, which is really less of a satire of crowdfunding and more of a satire of people's seeming inability to make independent individual decisions. The Zeus and Isis go on Helen's show to promote the apocalypse, basically to get people to fund their nuclear Armageddon. And people are just all about it because there's Helen telling them this is great. There are these people who they've heard of before. And that's something, it's like if you've heard somebody's name, it's like they can almost tell you to do worse things if you already know who they are. You know what I mean? And it's like there are these celebrities on with another celebrity, and they're all saying this is great, and the audience is just clapping, and it's just the same people who are funding this apocalypse. There are people, when they sit down and they watch a TV show, I don't know how often they're thinking to themselves, what are the ramifications of this thing that you're trying to make me buy, this thing you're trying to make me a consumer of? It seems like it's such a automatic process. I don't, to my satisfaction, see enough people questioning that.
It's funny because we watch a lot of TV shows, and we don't realize not only is this a guest on the Jimmy Fallon show there to promote his or her movie, but they'll also tell stories that somehow involve a product. Yeah, I was so hungry, I stopped over at McDonald's, and I got myself a McFlurry, because McDonald's is paying Emma Stone to tell that story or something like that. And it's really disingenuous, like you're saying. And the media is one of those things that we as a society, we consume the same diet all the time. It's almost as if we are consuming almost exclusively fast food media, and very rarely do we go to the market and pick up some lettuce and some potatoes.
Yeah, it's a McFlurry for your brain. Do you really want to pour that shit on your brain every day over and over again?
Well, I hope my audience does. Now, I wanted to ask you about, we have about 5 minutes or so left in the show. I wanted to ask you about your artistic collaborator a little bit.
Good, I'm glad you did. Daniel Arutamasa, this guy is fantastic. He's a very young guy. He's 22 now, but when he drew Holy F***, he was only 20. We met through, I used to run a small podcast network called The Audio Shocker. And he was listening to one of our episodes, and I was talking about the story I wanted to make called The Bible 2, that I thought nobody would ever work on with me. And Daniel left a comment, and he was like, I'd draw it. And I was like, I can't pass on this. This guy's, he's a competent cartoonist. I like what he's done already. I got to, capitalize on this. And within a week, we were collaborating on this story. And it really went well. And it's a really true collaboration in the sense that, yes, I presented this idea of the Bible too. It was sort of a shell of what we have for Holy F***. But I said, let's plot this together. Let's break it down, rebuild it. Well, this story that we are both completely invested in. and then go from there. And, you know, he's just been a wonderful collaborator, and I'm psyched to be working on a sequel with him right now. Holy
and it's interesting because it seems that you're working on in so many different areas. You said you had some digital comics, you had a podcast, and you're doing traditional print media now. And it's interesting because it's sort of that self-promoting, that self-marketing, and that led you to a true collaboration, as you say. Now, when Daniel was working on the book, is this something that he's doing, you know, all computer-generated, or is this the old-fashioned paper and pen type of method?
He does a lot of his sketches on paper, on sketchbooks, but for this particular story, and this isn't the only way he works, but for this one in particular, he is working strictly digitally. So, you know, he does his thumbnails on his laptop, he goes back, and he doesn't really have a penciling stage. He sort of goes straight from his thumbnails and layouts into his inks because he's the only one doing it. He doesn't necessarily need to pencil it. And then he colors right there. And when we pitched this book, it wasn't colored, but the publisher asked for color. So, you know, we've added that to our creation process now. And then he'll pass it over to me. He likes to do the sound effects. He's a little bit better at them than I am, but I like to letter my own dialogue. And then the book's done, really.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, you have a couple of different covers, the variant covers. Did Daniel do the art for all of the covers, or did you have other folks come in and do some stuff? Because one or two of the covers looked to be a different style.
Yeah, he did a good chunk of, you know, he did all our 4 regular covers, and then he did variant covers for issues number 1 and number 4. We brought in an artist named Jerry Gaylord, who's on contract with Action Lab, and he did variants for number 2. And then my friend who was on the podcast with me that Daniel was listening to when he left that comment, her name's Kaylee McDougall. She did the variant covers for issue number 3, which are just very near and dear to my heart because, you know, in going with the way that I'm always trying to kind of toss some commentary into what I do, these are sort of a commentary on the comic book market where, you know, cheesecake sells. So we did some really out there Satan and Jesus beefcake.
That's a good way to put it. And then there were the covers with the rainbows, which I guess would be another sort of commentary.
Yeah, well, those kind of had a weird progression. I think that maybe those were more subconscious commentary than I realized, you know, in terms of what you end up finding out about the nature of Satan and Jesus' relationship throughout the story. But those were inspired by this really just cracked out Mighty Mouse cover from like old school Mighty Mouse. I don't know, maybe in the 50s, I want to say. And it is just a bizarre cover where he's roller skating on a rainbow and his eyes are open wide. Like he was just really doing some hardcore drugs. And when we were brainstorming ideas for the cover, I sent that to Daniel, and he's like, oh, man, I got this cartoony style I want to try out, you know. And he just sort of riffed on it and took it to a whole other level. And those are my favorites. I love those.
Well, Nick, I want to thank you so much for speaking with us today. We've run out of time. And I'd like to thank you at home for watching. You've been watching Comic Culture. If you have any questions about the show, this episode in particular, feel free to give me a call. My office number is 910-775-4364, and I'll be happy to discuss it with you. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again next time.